Brilliant. Oh, hi. Welcome back. I think today we're on chapter 7 of Fred, Wizard in Training. He's just got on the bus, and if I can find my book, there it is. We'll get on with reading that. So, chapter 7. Where to, young man? Asked the bus driver. Fred looked down at the leaflet and the instructions under the How to Find Us section. Death's Door, please, Fred replied. Are you sure? The bus driver said, surprised. That's what it says here, Fred confirmed. Fair enough. Not a place I'd want to find myself, though. We don't stop there very often, I tell you, the driver replied. Anyway, young man, one way or return? Fred hesitated. Would he be coming back? He doubted it. Why waste his money on a return? Just one way, I suppose, Fred said glumly. Very well, a single to Death's Door it is, the bus driver replied. That's the most ominous ticket I've ever sold, that's for sure, he chuckled. Fred found a seat at the back of the bus, where he always sat on the way to school. Then he realised the bus was almost empty, and the front seats on the top deck, the best seats, normally occupied by the youngest children on the way to school, were free. He moved, making himself comfortable. If this was to be the final bus journey of his life, he was going to make sure he enjoyed it. As the bus drove on, Fred gazed out at rolling hills and patchwork fields gently bathed in the soft morning sun. Through the window he could feel its calming warmth on his cheeks, and he closed his eyes to appreciate the feeling more. When he reopened them, the hills had become glorious mountains, the fields vast valleys. It was a beautiful journey. When the bus eventually came to a halt, the driver called up to Fred. We're here, mate, he said. Death's Door. Thanks, Fred shouted back down. He grabbed his bag and tried to get up. His bottom took a little longer than normal to detach itself from the seat. Something was holding it back. Yuck, Fred groaned. He attempted to pick the huge mound of chewing gum off the seat of his trousers, but this was exceptionally sticky stuff, and Fred stood for a moment with his hand firmly attached to his backside. Great, he thought. Not only will the lizard eat me whole, now he'll do it laughing too. Eventually, after contorting himself into strange positions and lots of yanking of his hand with his free arm, Fred detached the gum from his bottom. He could feel the worry building inside him. Saying goodbye to the driver, Fred stepped off the bus into the village of Death's Door. He was surprised, a little amused even despite his worries, to find that it was quite unlike its name suggested, and not at all what he'd imagined. He'd expected to arrive in a dreary, soulless, colourless place, where the atmosphere was tense and ominous. In every nightmare he'd had about the competition, he'd struggled to find his way through an impossible labyrinth of miserable grey buildings, running along the same streets over and over, before the lizard finally caught up with him, roared fire, and the dream ended. Instead, the reality was a bustling village of jolly, brightly coloured hiddly-piddly buildings that lined the winding, cobbled lanes. Above the heads of friendly locals and happy visitors hung decorative bunting that depicted Merlin's smiling face and added to the festival atmosphere. Helpful signs in the shape of arrows littered every street corner, and the smell of delicious, freshly baked goods lingered invitingly in the air. Everyone seemed relaxed, quite unfazed that somewhere, not far away, dwelled a hungry, terrifying monster. Everyone except Fred, that is, whose nervous mind was very much occupied with thoughts of the lizard. Above the chitter-chatter of pedestrians, he could already hear the fanfare and commotion of the competition's opening ceremony. Heart pounding faster, he followed the signs and direction of the noise. As Fred navigated his way along the winding streets, he felt the atmosphere around him changing. The further he travelled from the cheerful village centre, the more open the landscape became, until there were only a few scattered buildings, and the peaks of mountains, not rooftops, dominated the skyline. The air felt charged with a strange kind of nervous tension that Fred could feel affecting him too. When he passed the last building and turned the final corner, Fred could barely believe his eyes. In front of him was a mighty gathering of wizards and witches, the like of which he'd never seen. The sheer number of people was astounding. How silly of him to assume it was a local event. He'd expected to find 100 or so witches and wizards, not hundreds of thousands of them. Fred realised that the posters advertising the event must have been displayed in places all over the world. As he walked, he overheard several wizards and witches discussing all manner of tactics and techniques that they hoped, this year, would help them defeat the lizard. My giant feather duster didn't work as well as I'd hoped, one wizard was saying, so I won't be trying that again. You mean to say the lizard isn't ticklish? His friend asked. Not in the slightest. Right, well, that scuppers my plans. Better think of something else. I wonder if boring it to death will work. Ha! I could read at your latest book, Nigel. Lay off it, Nigel replied. It's not that bad. Anyway, I got quite far using my fishing equipment last year. I just needed to be a little bit more precise. I think humour's the way forward, a witch in a separate conversation piped up. After I told all my jokes, that lizard will be dying with laughter. Oh, good idea, a friend said excitedly. Are you going to tell that one about the cauldron and the cauliflower? Come on, Jane, that won't cut it, the witch replied. I was going to finish with the one about the griffin, the goat and the 3 goblins. Really, she gasped, but it's so rude. Not as rude as the one you told at Margaret's funeral. That was shocking. Wizards and witches of every age, shape and size, of every nationality and race were here at Death's Door. They wore all manner of dress, old-fashioned, traditional magical attire, everyday clothes that non-wizards wore, outfits that were ridiculous, breathtaking or comical. Together, the colours were majestic, and as wizards moved here and there, they seemed to create a human kaleidoscope. The poster had promised the best competition, and with this number of wizards and witches and the impressive backdrop of mountains framed by a blue, cloudless sky, Fred was starting to see why. Still, despite the impressiveness of it all, the size of the gathering made his heart sink. What chance did he have against all this competition? He might as well give up now and go home. But, as soon as the thought came into Fred's head, it was knocked out again by the trembling earth beneath his feet. What was that? Everyone else had noticed it too. Witches exchanged worried glances. Some of the older, less sturdy wizards were knocked off their feet. The tremors continued, more powerful each and every time. It was as if an angry giant was stomping his monstrous feet, hitting the surface of the earth in a tantrum of mighty force. Fred reached out to grab something, anything, to steady himself. His hand clasped itself around a thin, wispy material. He fell to the ground, pulling with him the beard he grabbed onto, along with its frail owner. Neither the man nor the beard was remotely impressed. For a moment, the earth stopped shaking. Fred rose to his feet and lifted the old wizard up by way of apology. The elderly man straightened his beard, gave Fred a cursory nod, and wandered off to find a safer spot where his facial hair could get on with growing longer and more ridiculous in peace. Then it happened. Without a moment's notice, the air crackled and seemed to split in two as a thunderous roar punished the atmosphere and all those gathered inside it. In the distance, enormous flames burst into the air, singeing the clouds that had appeared out of nowhere. The roar echoed among the surrounding mountains. They seemed to shrink in fear of the sound. The lizard had announced its presence. That was the end of chapter 7. What on earth will happen? Will Fred survive? Well, there's 2 more books in the series, so that is the question, isn't it? I know where my money is, but I'm not going to give it away. Join me tomorrow for chapter 8 of Fred, Wizard in Training.